Okay, I think more people will join, but we should start in order to not delay the session. So welcome all the people to the third webinar about policy. This is a webinar that is part of a series that is in the framework of a policy dialogue within the STOPP project. And today's session will be revolving around smarter packaging, reuse, and recycling policies, turning consumers' insights into impact. This presentation will be presented by Angelos Balatsas, a postdoctoral researcher in the University of Vaasa. So welcome, Angelos. So before giving you the floor and giving you a short introduction, I would like just to mention that this session is being recorded, so it will be available in the upcoming days probably. And then we want to make this session as much as interactive as possible. So not only Angelos talking. So if you have any curiosities or questions or comments during the presentation, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A button so we can answer and address your questions at the end of the session. Rather than that, it's a privilege to have you here, Angelos. The floor is totally yours, and I give you all the floor to you.
Okay, thank you, Pablo, and hi everyone. So, yes, my name is Angelos. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the School of Marketing and Communication at the University of Vaasa, which is situated in the west coast of Finland. Just a couple of words about myself. I am now like 4 years postdoc researcher, and most of the time I have been dealing with sustainable packaging and the role of consumers. And the idea with this session today is to bring focus on consumers and their role in the transition toward sustainable food packaging. And we can perhaps go to have a look at the agenda. So I have prepared a very short presentation about the STOPP project that Pablo mentioned, which is this policy dialogue is part of. And then we will deal a little bit with consumers in a sense. First, we will look at the how to increase consumer acceptance. And today's focus is going to be on reusable packaging. And I will explain that in a while, why this is the focus of today's presentation. And then we will also give some particular ideas of how to accelerate the transition toward reusable food packaging, especially from the marketing and communication perspective. And as Pablo said, at the end, hopefully there is still some time for questions and discussion. So in brief now about the STOPP project. So STOPP project, the main aim is to reduce the environmental impact caused by the plastic food packaging waste. And of course, the main driver behind it is also the new regulations and legislation that back up this particular issue, like the PPWR. And we have quite a diverse consortium behind that project, where the Technical Research Center of Finland, VTT, is the coordinator, and the consortium includes various stakeholders along the food packaging value chain, including food packaging suppliers, recyclers, municipal organizations focusing on environmental services, research organizations stemming from university to the technical research, of course, and also the chemical research organizations, but also reusable packaging operators and communication organizations. So the idea there with all these actors or this consortium is actually to analyze the plastic waste impact, to monitoring the current usage of packages, including the less sustainable and the more sustainable, to design sustainable business models in terms of sustainable food packaging, so to support actually the commercialization and the widespread of these solutions, to boost recycling efforts, but also to understand consumer attitudes, and I would say more generally acceptance of different sustainable packaging solutions. And in brief, these solutions in the STOPP project relate to recycling and reusable packaging. But as said, today we will focus more on the reusable packaging. So when we talk about increasing the consumer acceptance, the idea there, at least from the consumer side, has been, first of all, to understand the key meanings that consumers associate with food packaging disposal behaviors, including the packaging reuse, but also the recycling, and then the less sustainable packaging behaviors, such as the littering and the ordinary throwing packages, food packages to the trash bin, to the general trash bin. Now, why do we want to focus today on packaging reuse? This is because as compared to other solutions, for instance, the recycling that has been long around, and we have lots of insights and knowledge about the problems and the issues related to it. In the case of reusable packaging, there is a persisting low adoption that it is observed, even in the cases that actual reusable packaging solutions have been introduced in the market. Still, people do not seem to adopt them. And this is a challenge. And this is a challenge that we would like to deal a little bit more, not only from the understanding a bit more the consumers, but most importantly, finding ways of how to actually shift this low adoption and actually make reusable packaging to stand next to other sustainable solutions, such as the recycling. So the first objective we had was to figure out what kind of meanings this kind of disposal behaviors actually attribute to those behaviors. And the second is to develop, test, and validate behavior change strategies that aim to favor the recycling and the reuse of food packaging. Again, today the focus will be more on the reusable side. So just to give you a bit of a background, why are we interested in meanings and why do we want to figure out what kind of meanings consumers attribute to the reusable packaging and to the recycling as well? It is because, first of all, we know that cognitive stimuli, so something that resonates with the rational thinking, that they emphasize, first of all, the environmental benefit behind the sustainable packaging solutions. And of course, this seems to increase the intentions of consumers to try and adopt reusable packaging solutions, but also more generally they are connected with a more broader wave related to sustainable consumption. Then, of course, this kind of cognitive stimuli, they influence the sustainable choices overall, even in real life situations. But it has also been questioned whether this is the only way, and if any kind of choices in real purchasing situations can be attributed only to the emphasis on the environmental sustainability. Other studies, correlational studies, have suggested other positive links, including links with emotions and sustainable consumptions, but also some socially charged concepts like the warm glow, that it is the good feeling that we get when we have figured that we have done something good for the planet, for other people, or for the environment. Both emotions and these socially charged concepts, both they have been associated to sustainable consumption and therefore give some reason for us to look a little bit beyond the environmental sustainability and the very rational and perhaps even spontaneous associations that people already make when you talk about recycling and reusable packaging. People associate it spontaneously or automatically with environmental sustainability. But our idea has been what is beyond this stage and how we can actually use other ways, how we can discover perhaps other meanings that consumers associate with sustainable packaging. So the first way that we did this was to actually identify those cognitive, affective, and social meanings that consumers associate with packaging reuse. And how did we do this? At the first stage, we did it with setting up a between subject online experiment, meaning that consumers were exposed to different kind of narratives, so short stories depicting different consumption situations, food consumption situations, with varying packaging disposal behaviors, including the trash bin, the littering, but also the sustainable options. There is recyclable packaging and the reusable packaging. And after exposure, consumers have evaluated the narratives by attributing different kinds of meanings, cognitive, affective, like emotions, and social meanings to them through a check all that apply methodology. And in order to get a better understanding of what happens around Europe, we have chosen now 4 different countries representing the north, south, east, and west, like Finland, France, Spain, and Poland. And we actually ran this experiment with 5,760 participants. So this is just a way that you could see how the procedure of the study went from the participants' point of view. So after the participants have been assigned to have been admitted to the study, they have been assigned to read one short narrative about a food consumption situation with a link to a specific behavior. Now, about the food consumption, we have chosen 3 different products: a takeaway meal, yogurt, and beverage that are consumed outdoors, because this is the place where usually the unsustainable behaviors occur. And those particular products are also very well known across Europe and also very well consumed. So after they have been actually reading these narratives, they have been asked to attribute the cognitive, affective, and social meanings, and also evaluate the pleasantness of the disposal behavior described in the narrative. And after that, we collected some demographics and socioeconomics and some psychographics that could characterize the meaning attribution. But today we will focus a bit more on the meanings. So just to give you an idea of what narratives were presented to the participants, if we take the takeaway meal as an example, on the left side, you can see the generic story that is about a person buying takeaway meal from a restaurant in a plastic package, and the person consumes the meal outdoors, because, as we said, this is more likely that different behaviors, disposal behaviors occur, and they might be potentially dangerous. So if the participant has been, for instance, allocated to the recycling, then the story continues like that. The person consumes the meal outdoors and recycles the package. After that, the packaging material is used for similar or other products. So this is a way to hint to the recycling. So based on this approach, and depending on the narrative that each person had been exposed and read, then we asked the participants to actually choose those meanings that they feel that they attribute, that they are connected with this kind of behavior. So it could be about making sense, it could be about logic in general, it could be about convenience, it could be about pricing, it could be about the hygiene and safety, of course, about the environmental sustainability. But then we also asked different kind of positive and negative affective meanings. Um, and from the social meanings, again, we have many of those included. In brief, this could be described as social meanings referring to the person, like for example, the personal norms, but also the how other people's about other people's actions, like the injunctive group norms, but also about how a person is seen by other people, like the social desirability. Now, where did we find all these meanings? This is based on literature on sustainable consumption and behavior, but also from our previous studies and exploration in specific with reusable packaging. So this made this huge list of meanings, but then the idea has been to figure out how each of these meanings actually, or which of these meanings are actually coming closer to the different packaging disposal behavior, obviously including the recycling and the reusable packaging. So I'm just going to give you a short glimpse to the some of the results, and this concern the takeaway food packaging, and more specifically here we are looking at multiple, or the result of a multiple correspondence analysis, that the idea was to categorize the cognitive, affective, and social meanings and disposal behavior in two dimensions. So what we do here is that actually we connect the meanings, the attributes, as we call them, with the different behaviors. Now you can perhaps you can see on the bottom right quadrant the two behaviors, the recycling and the reuse, close to each other, where in the top right quadrant you can see many of the meanings, and these are actually the most of the, actually they are all the positive meanings, while on the left bottom quadrant you can see the general trash standing alone, and on the upper left quadrant you can see the littering and being also a bit more closer to negative meanings. So now, the idea and how to read this kind of result is that when meanings, first of all, what we can see is that many of these meanings on the upper right quadrant, they are very close, or in some close distance at least, to the reuse and recycling. And then at the second level, we can see, for instance, that these kind of meanings are actually making some smaller groups. Like, for instance, certain cognitive meanings are close to one another, and they are very close also to this behavior. So, like, makes sense that it has a positive effect on the amount of packaging waste, that it slows the spread of microplastics. Or then the social meanings, like it is pleasing such kind of behavior, meaning the recycling and the reuse, because it does something good for the planet, and so on. Slightly further up from the recycling and reuse, there is another group of cognitive meanings, like the financially meaningfulness, the positive effect on CO2 emissions, and again, some other social meanings, like these moral obligations and the approval from other people, the expectation of other people to perform that behavior, or the satisfaction because it is good for the society. As I said before, this is the warm glow kind of social meaning, and the pleasantness because it protects the future generations. And then, to some extent, there are also positive emotions in connection to reusable packaging, but again, here you can see that they are a little bit more distant, at least compared to the others. And these are the optimism, hope, and also the social status, of course. Except the emotions, it is also the social status that stands a little bit more distant. And then if we look about the negative emotions, they are, as I said, a bit closer to the, or much closer to the littering behavior, and much further from the recycling and reuse, which also makes sense if you think about. So what did we do with this exercise? Okay, we identified the different meanings. We identified that consumers attribute certain meanings, especially the cognitive ones, social ones, and then some affective ones, positive affective for the sustainable packaging behaviors, and negative affect toward the least sustainable behavior related to packaging, meaning the littering. So what to do with those meaning, and the way that they have been forming different groups, which means that they correlate heavily with each other. The idea there was to use this kind of meanings to justify and give a little bit flesh in behavior change strategies that are aimed to actually facilitate the uptake of reusable and recyclable food packaging solutions. So the idea there was, the objective was to develop and test strategies that prompt consumers to favor food products in reusable packaging solutions at least for today, we will focus on that. So how did we do this? We had first an online experiment where we actually used it in order to develop and initially test the strategies. And then we also backed these results up by actually setting up and running a field experiment to validate the strategies, especially for takeaway meals and reusable packaging. So about the online experiment, the idea was to figure out, first of all, the most effective behavior change strategies. And then the idea there was then to take them later on for validation. In the online experiment, again, we took further the idea with the takeaway meal and the vanilla yogurt. For the takeaway meal, we developed strategies related to the in-store marketing, because this is perhaps where the choices are made when you are standing in front of a queue and you are about to take a meal to eat it somewhere else. And then you have a choice to make between the packages that they are available to you, supposedly if you have another alternative except the single-use packaging. And then for the vanilla yogurt, because this is a fast-moving consumer good and it can be found in many marketplaces, we used the packaging design as a means to start communicating the different messages that compose the behavior change strategies. And in the field experiment, as I said, we used actual reusable packages for takeaway meals and the in-store environment in order to actually test and validate the strategies. So for the online experiment first, so in a nutshell, like we developed 6 narratives that aim to offer consumers reasoning to choose reusable packaging against the single use. And these are based on cognitive, positive affect, social combinations, also cognitive and social meanings, and cognitive affect and negative affect reasonings. Obviously, the negative affect reasonings connect to the single-use packaging. And then in-store information and packaging labels were used as communication strategies for the takeaway meals and vanilla yogurts, as I said. So in-store information for takeaway meals and packaging labels for the vanilla yogurts. And then we did this experiment again by using a between subject design where each participant was exposed to choice situations where a narrative with a reasoning was visible. And the control group we also included, which means that we actually asked people to choose between single-use and recyclable packaging and single-use and reusable packaging, but without showing them any narrative, just stating that this is a reusable packaging and this is a single-use packaging, for instance. So participants' packaging choices were recorded for both products, and we included around 3,000 consumers, again from the same country, to also be able to compare and continue working with the same countries as before. So if you look now on the right side, some examples of the choice situations, this is how the participants were able to make a choice. So we showed them one image. If we start with the takeaway meal, that we ask them which one of the following packaging solutions would you choose right now. And then we had 2 different packaging, like we had a visual kind of support for them that they were able to also read the narrative. So in the narrative that I have there, it says, make a choice for the benefit of the environment, feel good yourself. So if you think about this, includes the cognitive aspect, which is to make the good for the environment, but also the positive affect aspect, which is to feel good about yourself. When it comes to the yogurt and the packaging label, you can see how we implement it in the bottom right. So we used the same kind of narrative, but this time we applied it in the packaging as part of a packaging label. So what did we figure out from this exercise? Here you can see the choices that people made through this online experiment, or you can read this as follows. So every kind of bar, it represents the condition that consumers evaluated or make the choice. So the first one refers to the exposure of consumers to the cognitive reasoning, the second to the affective reasoning, the third to the social reasoning, and so on. The last one, it is the control where we didn't provide any reasoning. So here you can see that at least 80 or at least 79% or more of consumers, regardless of the condition of this experiment, they chose the reusable packaging for the takeaway meal. And this is of course pooled data now because to save time, but the same kind of result was observed in the different countries individually, and more or less the same kind of effect you can see also for the vanilla yogurt, although the percentages are a little bit lower. But still, if you think about now that choices, it means that like the majority of people would choose the reusable and the recyclable packaging for those two products. And then the idea, of course, was also to figure out what is the role of these behavior change strategies, and what is do they actually play any role in consumers, in facilitating consumers' choices? So what did we figure out? That actually narratives with cognitive, affective, social, and negative affect reason increased likelihood of choices for takeaways, and narratives with cognitive, social, affective, social reason increased likelihood of choices for vanilla yogurts. So at least some of the strategy content, it seems that it actually facilitates quite effectively the choices. And then, of course, we digged a little bit deeper to figure out the role of the countries and how whether the nationality, for instance, actually predicts the choices, the sustainable packaging choices. Again, is the single-use packaging, the role of socioeconomics and demographics and psychographics. For instance, we figured that those with higher environmental concern and food innovation and stronger biospheric personality, meaning that they care about the planet and Earth, they actually had increased likelihood of choosing. They were more likely to choose reusable packaging against the single use. But then again, of course, those that they had a more egoistic orientation reduced the reusable choices for takeaway meal. And in the specific case of the food of the vanilla yogurt, food involvement also, the higher you are more involved you are in food and you are very interested in food, then the less likely it is that you choose the reusable packaging. Nevertheless, these are initial understandings of what drives consumers behind their choices, but the main thing here to keep is that the strategy content had some effect in the choices. So that was at least what we kept and moved on. So based on this kind of initial testing of the behavior change strategies, we chose those three that they were most effective in the case of the takeaway meals, and we used those to facilitate actual choices, actual reusable packaging choices for takeaway meals. So these strategies were the cognitive reasoning, the social affective reasoning, and the negative affect reasoning applied for the single-use packaging. So how did we do this? It was that we actually used in-store information in three formats. That this is the more information-based, so it's about the classical provision, giving information to people. Another we call packaging labels. In practice, it means like some kind of a sticker that illustrates those different reasonings. And another one, it is the activity tags approach, which is nudging people toward the behavior rather than, or let's say that it puts a choice of a person about the choice of reusable packaging into a broader perspective, meaning to be a part of a more general behavior. So based on this approach, we developed the stimuli that you can see on the right side, and I can show you later how did we implement those. And we actually organized a field experiment in collaboration with three restaurant and reusable packaging operator in Bern area in Switzerland. And I think also one of the restaurants were in a different location, but anyway, these were in Switzerland. So each restaurant employed different communication strategy. One of them used the information-based, the other the packaging label, and the third one the activity tags, and then the 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 messages, the different reasonings were circulating throughout the period of the experiment, which was overall 3 months. So each of these reasonings, each of these manipulations was visible to customers for 1 week, with several weeks washout periods between those, so to avoid to actually make sure that the responses that we get, meaning the packaging choices, they are actually based, or they are somehow based on the messages that we have been projecting. So customers take away food packaging choices, single-use and reusable packaging in more specific, were monitored throughout the experiment, and actually based on this, we calculated the share of reusable packaging choices of all packaging choices. So in total, we had almost 17,000 packaging choices that we observed, and then we calculated the shares for the reusable packaging and the single-use packaging, and then even more, we dig deeper to figure out how many of those they occurred for each of the conditions that we explored. So this is how we implemented the campaign. It is based on different visual material that they were placed in the premises of the different restaurants, and they were changing they were staying for 1 week visible, then we were taking them off, and then after 3 weeks, we put the new one. So based on this, we were able to figure out at least that some reasonings, and in some of these formats of campaigns, actually they had a positive effect in reusable packaging choices. But even before we go to this specific, please have a look now and see how different it is, the result, when it comes to packaging choices. You can read these kind of figures by actually thinking that the 0 to 25 there, it actually corresponds to the percentage of choices. And imagine now that we talk about in the best restaurant, or in the restaurant that it had the most reusable packaging choices overall, we can see that in the best situation, it had a little bit less than 20%. And just remember now that in the online choice experiment, we were talking about 80% of choices. So of course, this reflects much more the real life situation and how reusable packaging choices come in real life. Now, if we dig into the results and we look at the specific results and the effect that these behavior change strategies had in the people's choices, we can see that at least the information campaign had some effect, meaning that the exposure to the social affective reasoning increased the reusable packaging choices compared to the situation where no kind of campaign was available, whereas other reasonings did not have any effect at all. When we talk about the packaging label, meaning the stickers, that the sticker format that we have introduced in the different areas in the restaurant and in the packages, we could see that the cognitive and negative affect reasoning actually increased the reusable packaging choices compared to the other, meaning to the social affective reasoning and also to the control. And in the last one that we tried, this activity tag approach, which was to contextualize the packaging choice as part of a behavior, there were no effects detected, meaning that regardless of the exposure, the packaging choices didn't make any change in the reusable packaging choices. So the main takeaways from this exercise, at least, it's that reusable food packaging against the single use was chosen by many consumers in the online study. But as I said, these results needs to be treated with extreme caution, as this refers to hypothetical choices. On the other hand, the field experiment showed the reality, where reusable packages, regardless of any exposure to any message, are the minority, and they remain the minority even after exposure to different behavior change strategies. But of course, this kind of approach showed to us that something can be done, and that different communication strategies are actually connect or they can be used to increase the reusable packaging choices. Of course, it's not about making the reusable packaging the main choice or the status quo, but at least they can facilitate an increase. But on the other hand, of course, we were not able to identify clear patterns of how actually what is the effect of these strategies. And before we go more to the policy making and how to make such kind of insights at least relevant from the policy making perspective, I just want to sum up a little bit what we have learned so far, at least when during the STOPP project when it comes to the to reusable packaging. So first of all, we can say that consumers associate the different sustainable packaging behaviors, including the reusability, of course, with positively charged cognitive, affective, and social meanings. And these include, but also go beyond the environmental sustainability argument. They refer to logic, to convenience, but also to positive emotions like joy and hope, optimism, and also the warm glow that we mentioned earlier. And then, of course, certain connections between different meanings, they also emerged. And this is good to remember because obviously people do not just choose or evaluate a particular behavior based on a singular meaning, but usually it is a combination. It's a connection between different things that makes you to choose something or to appreciate sustainable behavior, such as the reusable and the recycling. Then, on the other hand, the littering, of course, it is deemed as a socially unacceptable behavior and as a result of carelessness, and it has strong connections to negative meanings. And of course, this can also be used, and I can show you how, as part of interventions to actually prompt people toward more the sustainable packaging. So about the behavior change strategies, to conclude, the idea there is that actually the different kinds of meanings, to identify different kinds of meanings, actually they can actually be used to provide some justification for the design of behavior change strategies. On the other hand, those strategies seem to have an influence, but of course, this kind of influence has to be put into perspective in a sense that it can perhaps increase a little bit the use, but still not at a satisfactory level that we would say that now, okay, that reusable packaging has the place that it deserves in the people's choices. But then the idea, of course, it's how to accelerate consumers' transition toward the reusable food packaging. And as I said earlier, the idea there why we persist with the reusable packaging, it is because of the low adoption level, despite the presence of different reusable packaging solutions in some markets. But and of course, at least in the reusable packaging case, consumers have a major role to play because they finance the reusable packaging, but also they are perform the main actions related to it, the return and the refills of the packages. Now, how to do this? One way to think about to support the policy design when it comes to the reusable packaging is to start thinking about the behavior of a person, the reusable packaging behavior in that case. So this behavior change wheel, which comes from a very influential article from the Implementation Science Journal, it says that actually a behavior can actually be attributed to capability, be it psychological and physical, but also to the motivation of a person, that is the cognitive processes like the goals, decisions, habits, and so on that energize and direct the behavior, and the opportunity, which are all factors that lie outside the person that can make the behavior possible or even prompt it. So based on this kind of behavior, of course, we can start designing different interventions and also put those interventions as part of broader policies that can actually support the implementation of these interventions. So when it comes to the reusable packaging, at least at the tip of the iceberg, and what we already know is that we have the legislation such as the PPWR, but also we know that at least when the reusable packaging is brought up as a topic in terms of marketing and communication policy, it is always in connection to environmental sustainability. but under the surface, and what we think that it might be relevant in the future, and especially from the marketing and communication policy making perspective, it is to actually start thinking a bit more about the motivation and the capabilities of people and how to strengthen these parts, especially by using the different kinds of meanings and reasonings that people already we know that they identify with reusable packaging. And there are some examples, at least for different interventions, starting, for instance, with education. Of course, it is about raising the awareness of people and strengthening the knowledge and understanding related to reusable packaging. And of course, this can be done with social and mass media campaigns. And this is perhaps the most easy and the most easy to understand that this is the one of the very first things to do. It's to educate people. Nevertheless, I have to say that it's not necessarily that that's the only way to do this. So of course, then it's more about also the training, because people don't really know what is reusable packaging about, or the majority of people. So of course, one thing is to tell them what it is to reuse packaging and connect it perhaps with older behaviors that resemble reuse, like for instance, taking a lunchbox to your school, or repurposing a packaging. But another is to train people of how the packaging reuse it happens when such kind of approach it's backed up by a system that takes care of the returns and then cleaning of the packaging and so on. Then, of course, another way to nudge consumers and actually perhaps prompt the choices, it is to actually change or play a little bit with the in-store design and the choice architecture. For example, you could favor the physical display or the availability of reusable packaging against the single use, or even offer popular products only in reusable packaging option for some specific periods, or even regularly. But then, of course, the same kind of principle of changing or playing with the choice architecture, it can, of course, also be relevant for the online store design, especially thinking that online orders of takeaway meals, for instance, are always increasing, or they increasing for a long time already. So, of course, then this is another area that you could again make the reusable, for instance, to be the default option, like a pre-selected option when somebody orders a meal. Then, of course, it's about persuading the consumers. And of course, in persuading the consumers, the emotions, they have a huge role to play, because persuasion, it is based, or it is heavily based on emotions, be they positive or negative. When we talk about positive emotions, it's about in connection with the reusable packaging. For instance, it could be by priming them with pride and admiration. So one way to do this is to actually use the aesthetics, so to have the high quality aesthetics in the packaging and to the return process design, so to make it to feel something that someone is proud to do and to actually even show it to others. Another is to actually trigger the warm glow, which is to communicate the positive feelings in connection to the sustainability contribution or to the society. Another is to make someone to feel more unique by using this approach, like for instance, to actually give them access to specific products, items only through the choice or even the repeated use of reusable packaging. Another way is to increase the sense of ownership that someone has toward the packaging. And if you think about ownership, it is a peculiar but very interesting aspect of reuse, because a consumer needs to care and live with a package, but at the same time, this package may be owned or part of a broader supporting packaging value chain. So, of course, to trigger the ownership feeling is one way also to persuade people. And then the other is to play a little bit with the anthropomorphic design, for instance, to facilitate different positive feelings like the joy and the playful interaction with the packaging. Of course, there can be also negative feelings associated to the single-use packages, and, for example, show the afterlife of single-use packaging, and to induce guilt and disgust in connection to this standard, to the ordinary choice of single-use packaging. And of course, something that it's not exactly negative feeling, but it's called the FOMO, the fear of missing out, is to communicate the positive experiences that some consumers, perhaps the early adopters, have with reusable packages, so to make others to actually want to try it, so to actually jump on the same wave. Another way is to incentivize, of course, the consumers to use this, and this can be done by actually offering different financial rewards or indicating cost savings. And this, for instance, could be about discounts in connections to the choice and use of reusable packages. It could be about connecting the reusable packaging with some refund-based deposit system. It could be about introducing rewards through the loyalty points reward or membership schemes. So it's about more this gamification approach. But then again, this kind of incentivization can also happen with less rational aspects, or let's say less tangible aspects, like for instance enable those who are environmentally concerned, for instance, to track the CO2 consumption and waste and resource savings achieved through the reusable packaging use. And then the other is even the more selfish one, that you can highlight to someone the freedom of choice and what it comes. Like you can control the type and amount of food that it can be purchased in reusable packaging. About, of course, then the idea could be also that you create an expectation of a punishment or cost in connection to choose the single-use packaging that can actually prompt people toward the more sustainable solution. And this is to highlight different costs in connection to the single-use food packaging. And then the last one, at least it comes to the modeling, which is about showcasing reusable food packaging as an example for people to aspire or to imitate. And this can be done, for instance, in different ways. One way that I would like to highlight is, for instance, to use the very popular celebrities or influencers that each could represent perhaps different values. Therefore, it has a broad, different audience following. That the idea there is to actually include the reusable packaging in whatever values these influencers represent, but again, not from a sustainability perspective, but from other perspectives that at least so far we haven't seen, since the discourse has remained in around the environmental sustainability. So that was from my side, and I would like to at least stop talking and presenting, and leave some time for any questions or discussion.
Thank you so much, Angelos, for such an inspiring presentation. For the moment, we do not have any questions or comments. I
Oh,
don't know if maybe from the audience wants to type something in the chat. If not, well,
they,
you can always contact us through.
they can, yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, they can always contact us, and of course the email is there. Yes.
Yes. So if there are no questions, I would like to thank you one more time, Angelos, the time and the dedication for this valuable presentation. As I mentioned in the beginning, this presentation and the recording will be available on the STOPP website, and we will also share it in our communication channels, on our social media, and also on our newsletters. So we invite you to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and also stay tuned to upcoming opportunities where we will develop more interactive sessions, or we will share upcoming materials and outputs that are being generated in the Stop project. Rather than that, thank you all for attending this webinar, especially you, Angelos. Hope you have a very nice week ahead and holidays if it's your case. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The same to you. Thanks a lot for today.